some of the washes that I've already used. So I mentioned that like the parts that you cut through for a section or a plan is called poche. So I've got a color here that I've labeled poche. So that's what I used for the plan walls. I've really kind of I've started to experiment a little bit with color palettes, and I really love using this kind of yellow and blue for most of the painting. It's kind of dichromatic, so two colors really for most of it, and then I use like a red kind of highlights to kind of complement that. So I really like that kind of red poche. The colors that I typically use, and this will vary from artist to artist. I like the Winsor Newton tubes of watercolor. I've got Winsor Blue, Alizarin Crimson, Yellow Ochre, and then for black, Lamp Black. These will get you most of the colors you need. Since I'm an architect and I render brick a lot, I like this light red as well. That kind of helps you to make a nice brick color, usually mixed with some others. I also really love French ultramarine blue, which is what I'm going to be using today. And then if I'm doing a monochromatic rendering, I'll use a sepia. And I actually like this M. Graham & Co. brand for sepia a little bit better than the Winsor Newton. So I mentioned that for the specific color palette that I've been using, I experimented with mixing just the French ultramarine and yellow ochre to get the colors that I needed for a painting. I really love the effect. Mixing the same colors can kind of bring them in unity so that you're not having a lot of clashing colors. That's another thing that I'm trying to make my next breakthrough, and I'm studying a lot about color theory, and it's been really fascinating to me. So I'm also going to use a little bit of Lamp Black for this, but it's going to be mostly French ultramarine. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre just to bring it back to that unity, and then a little bit of Lamp Black. So I mentioned high quality brushes are important. However, I'm poor. And so I buy the cheapest high quality brushes I can. I really like these Princeton Aqua Elite. They're about $20 each, which I wouldn't spend less than that for something like this. But they should last you a long time. Mine don't because I do this way too often. But I use just usually a number 10 and a number 6. If I'm doing like a larger wash, I've got a few others, like a 18 I think is usually how big I go for these. But I'm not usually using a lot of really big brushes. I've got other bigger ones, but I don't use them very often because my work is a little bit more precision. Then I always have a cheap, what I call a scrub brush. This is what I help to mix my washes. And I want to beat that one up a little bit, so you don't want to spend a lot of money on that one. Yeah. Oh, questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned like quality paintbrushes. Does quality of like the paper matter?
Oh, 100%. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, that is a huge one because I've had so many students that buy the wrong paper and they have issues with the paper tearing and the masking tape, not coming off correctly, or the watercolor not mixing correctly. So watercolor paper I recommend is Arch's brand, 140 pound, cold press natural white. Those are the ones that I like to use. So I've been using it for a long time. I've done thousands of these renderings, by the way. I've done this so much, and I hardly ever have issues with the paper. So 100% recommend that paper. I'm a little frustrated because I feel like it's gone up in price like $5 per sheet in the past like 5 years. And maybe UVU students have driven up the demand or the whatever and made that worse. But. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a generous amount. I usually do a generous amount. Some people like to be a little bit more conservative with this. I'm going to apply a generous amount of paint and I'm applying this, hopefully you can see this, I'm applying this to the side of the jar, and I'm kind of working it into the water, rather than just throwing the whole glob in there. What you don't want to have happen is the glob to just kind of settle at the bottom. You want this to be well mixed in, so I'm applying it to the side, and I'm working it down into the water. And then I'm going to mix that in really nice. I always have a little test sheet of watercolor paper that I'm going to test these colors on. And I'm gonna actually add a little bit more of this one, just knowing that I'm probably going to want to get this one nice and dark. I mentioned that it's best to work light, especially if you're new at this, because there's going to be issues with the paint no matter how experienced you are. Watercolor is just tricky, and it's never going to be perfect. You kind of have to embrace the fact that it's not going to be perfect. But adding light washes and having multiple layers is going to get you the best results. However, my students don't have time, like I mentioned, for multiple layers. They usually only have time for a single layer. So I do recommend that they go a little bit darker than even my professors recommended, just so that they can get a little bit more contrast and have higher quality renderings. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of this yellow, like I mentioned, just to kind of bring this back to the unity. I think I got too much there, so I'm going to try to get this back in the tube a little bit. Add that to the side. I usually like to mix really cool colors for my shadows for obvious reasons. Hopefully obvious reasons. However, for some materials like brick, I do like to have a little bit warmer shadow, kind of a brownish red or brownish yellow, depending on the shade of the brick. And I'm going to add a little bit of lamp black to this, just so it's not too vibrant. These are a little bit more serious renderings. Be doing just a little bit. So what you see in the jar is never what it looks like when you apply it. Which is why you always want to have this little paper here next to you to test it. And you know, if this is a color that I haven't mixed before, or if I'm new to this, then I'm probably testing it more often than I am, just to kind of see the different shades that it's producing, or different colors. I think I want just a little bit more yellow in there. This is where you're creating the color palette is a lot of fun, and this is where it gets a little bit more creative and fun for the artist side of me. Any questions so far, guys? I'll kind of open this up to questions a little bit more once I get going, but feel free if you have any at that point.
Do you ever use like the paint palettes that are like that's already have like the dried paints in them, where you just add water?
I do, yeah. So I should have brought it with me, but I've got a little travel set that I use pretty often, and typically that's for when I've got like, you know, if I'm painting like a mural or a mosaic or something, and I need a lot more kind of writing with colors. I'm not going to mix a jar for every single color. So I will use that one pretty often, actually. But for most of the rendering, I'll just do something like this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call that one good. I probably would like it a little bit more darker, but I could add layers, which I think I'll do. So now that I've got that one's going to be my darkest. I'm going to line up my other 5. I'll kind of move these up so you can see them a little bit better. So I mentioned creating the color palette is a little bit more of the artistic side. This is a lot more of the scientific left brain side. But I'm going to be fairly scientific with this. What I'm going to do, using this little medicine dropper, I'm going to add a little bit of this pigment to each of these, and I'm gonna do a little bit less in each one. And then I'm gonna do the same thing, but with clear water, going the opposite way. I'm gonna do more in the first, less in this one, a little bit more in that one.
Were you taught this method at Notre Dame, or did you kind of come up with this by yourself?
So, some of this stuff is my own, but most of it was from Notre Dame. I never learned how to use the medicine dropper. You can tell that I have kids. I've got the infants. Having kids makes you a better artist.
I've used the pipettes as well, those little tiny pipettes. Have you used those?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, they got a little bulb, you just squeeze it, and yeah, they're good too.
Yeah, anything like that should work pretty well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test this gradient. So I'm going to take my lightest color first. This is slightly angled, this table, and so I can work the wash from top to bottom, and you can see this is going to create a nice gradient from light to dark. I like to work light to dark when possible, just because if you start with the darkest wash at the top, sometimes that will kind of infiltrate down to the lighter washes. I'm going to dry off my brush and kind of soak up the end, but you can see this is going to create a nice gradient, which I am happy with. And so I can go ahead and start using this on my painting. It is usually helpful to use the same type of paper for this little test sheet, because some paper can kind of make the color a little bit different than what it's actually going to be on your paper. I didn't have any scrap sheets of arches, so I'm going to trust this one's good enough. Oh, I should be good.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
How much time do I have left?
Let's call it about 10, 15 to 15.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to shout out questions, it's not the time.
Yes, yeah, now is a great time.
Okay.
I'll just be,
Here's a question.
yeah,
How is AI affecting what you're doing?
I don't know if I'm the one to ask. I've kind of been avoiding the world of AI a little bit more than I should be. But I have had my first students try to submit AI created artwork.
Oh,
I ended up
no.
failing the class because of it. Which I don't understand, right? Art is fun. Why do you want somebody else to do your art for you? But so there's that. But it's really hard to do this, to really mimic the effects of something like this with AI. It always just appears wrong.
Why do you put the people in your drawings?
Great question.
Or just
So it's for scale. So we have, in every architectural drawing, should have what's called a graphic scale. So this is showing, you could actually take this scale and measure exactly, how big everything is. But a quick way to understand the scale is to include a scale figure that you can tell this is a small pavilion, not like a ginormous building, right? This one's particularly small because that's my wife and she's 4'11". Alright, so I've got my jars laid out here. I think for this rendering what I'm going to do is I'm going to, the gradients, when you look at old Beaux-Art Academy renderings, or the École des Beaux-Arts renderings, sometimes the gradients will go dark to light from top to bottom, others will go light to dark. In this particular rendering, I think what I'm going to do is dark to light, which means I'm going to have to rearrange these real quick.
What are some common issues your students have when doing architecture?
That's a pretty loaded question. There's a lot of answers to that one. But like for my brand new students in the ARC 1010 class, which is their first architecture class, just understanding the coordination of like how the elevation and the plan and everything relate, that's always a little bit tricky for them. So you probably can't see this. I wonder if I can darken this slightly. Can I with this?
There's a button on the top.
Is it these?
The exposure.
Yeah.
That's
So
brighter.
darker possible. Is it working?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Makes
It's just got a glare on it.
It's in this slide.
Yeah, no worries. Alright, I need to find a wash here that's going to be good for this. So you probably can barely make out, I've got these really light lines drafted in here that represent the outlines of the regions of shade and shadow. And so that's going to help me to know exactly where those should end up. Okay, so I need to double check this and make sure I'm getting this right. I think we can do this very edge one first. I don't know if I have a lot of time to do others. But this side of the building is going to be completely in shadow. From this point down. I'm going to start with my dark wash here. You want to try and limit the washes that you're doing to something that's achievable. You don't want to like just do everything right at once. That'd be way too difficult. And then once you start a wash, you don't want to drop the brush and do anything. You don't want to answer the phone, you don't want to answer the door, you want to just ignore the world and paint. Which I think most artists love the idea of doing. Putting in headphones and just ignoring the world. So you can't see probably in the frame. But what I'm doing is I'm dipping my brush now in number 2. I think I'm going to move on to number 3. Number 3 being my third darkest. So I started at 1, now I'm going to 3.
Having kids, are you able to break away and get that time when you can not do anything else?
Yeah, most of this will happen in my office at school, but I do this at home pretty often. My kids are pretty good about knowing not to touch my setup and things. I've had students that have had their projects ruined by their kids.
Oh.
Thankfully, my kids have not done that yet. But so yeah, it's essentially once you have the region that you're going to be painting in, it's really just painting in the lines. But I love the way that the rendering starts to turn out once you start adding the shade and shadow, and it starts to really look three-dimensional, has its depth and texture. You'll see here I've added some shade to the edges of these rusticated stones that kind of show the depth of these stones. And it's not just kind of like smooth stone like on the edges, but it's got this added layer of depth to it. Those are called rusticated stones. I've also added a little bit of shade already to these columns to kind of give that roundness to them. Typically, if I'm going to be doing a wash for something like a column like that, I'm going to turn the board sideways because you always want to work with gravity, kind of more moving from the top areas down to the bottom. You can see here, I don't have a ton of, my brush is not super wet when I'm doing this kind of level of precision. But if I'm doing a large wash, like if I'm doing the sky in the background or something, I've got a big thick brush. You want to keep the brush pretty wet as you're working. Otherwise, you'll start to have issues with paint not mixing correctly. It always works out much more smoothly if you keep your brush nice and wet and work quickly, but not like, you don't have to be in a hurry, but you also don't want to dawdle. You want to kind of move kind of quickly. So we're probably getting close to time. Do you want me to keep going until 6:45? I can if you want, or we can just stop and ask questions.
I think we can have students ask questions after as well.
Okay. That should be fine.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'm gonna find, oh, are we done?
Do you want, keep going? Keep going.
Keep going.
Is that okay? Is that fine? Okay.
If
So what?
students need to go, you can.
One thing that I was not very careful with, I started on the very right-hand side. I usually like to move from left to right, obviously, as a right-hander, so I'm not like putting my hand in the wet washes.
I have a blow dryer if you need it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I'll just work on some of these details up here that my hand will be out of the way for. But yeah, let's go ahead and just open it up to questions. Feel free to just shout out your questions, and I'll answer kind of as I'm working.
Another devil's advocate question.
Yeah.
How does the industry, do they pay for hand rendered pieces? I know that there's lots and lots of software that can render stuff very quickly and accurately. Do you find that clients are paying for a hand rendered piece?
You need to find the right clients for sure. It's kind of a niche world. It is kind of growing, this kind of classical architecture world. But I've had regular clients from high-end residential firms out in Florida that have they like these kind of hand rendered designs. It kind of it sends a little bit different message to their clients that these are very carefully designed, you know, and it's not like a quick kind of the typical industry designs. So I've done a lot of commissions. I've done some for that firm out in Florida. I've actually done plenty for FFKR. I actually just finished another one for them. And so it definitely depends. Yeah, this is not industry standard by any means, but there is definitely a demand for it.
What is your process in designing buildings?
That's a great question. So I mentioned precedent. The first step for designing a new building or a new project of any kind is to do a precedent study. To study similar buildings of similar character that you're looking for. Learn as much as you can from them. Sometimes you'll even draw those buildings. One of the things that I love most about the project that I did for this book is that I learned so much about the design of traditional LDS meeting houses, tabernacles, and temples that really helped me as a temple designer to really just kind of speak the language already that those early designers were speaking. And then you'll move into design sketches. They're called esquisse. Everything in architecture has a French name because it started at the École des Beaux-Arts in France. And so we've got esquisse, we've got partie, we've got analytique. Yeah, those are all French terms that come from the École des Beaux-Arts. I'm probably going to go over some of these with another layer, but I don't want to go too crazy right now when I'm doing this live and I regret something. So start with the sketch, the esquisse, and then you'll go and refine them. So you usually do multiple concepts using, so one thing that we teach really heavily at UVU that I think would be a lot of fun for any of you that are interested in classicism is sacred geometry, which is innate in the world around us, all of the geometry that makes up the natural forms of our bodies and in nature, to learn from those and then to use those principles in your design. So you're always having that in the back of your mind as you're designing. You're working in all the different views, plan and elevation section, to make sure that they all coordinate. And then after those esquisse sketches, then you go into the refinement sketches where you start to make sure that everything's gonna work correctly. And then after the refinement sketches, then you go into kind of the more finalized presentation drawings that are the most accurate, most precise drawings.
If I can add to that.
Yeah,
then,
please.
One thing that you'll find is when people aren't trained in this method, they'll start out with the floor plan. And they'll think of the floor plan and give that the most importance, and then they'll make the outside of the building just work. This approach that Ben's talking about, you work with it all holistically, so you think of the elevation, the section, and the plan view all at the same time. So it ends up getting a final product that actually works cohesively together.
Yeah, that's a great comment. You always want to, you don't want one of your views to kind of be a leftover view. You always want to think of them together, which is hard to do at first. And so the design process is really slow as a new student. It becomes much quicker the more experience you get. Who can tell me the difference between shade and shadow? You guys know why we always separate those? Two different terms?
Between shade and shadow?
Yeah, shade and shadow.
Well, shade is. Let me get my notes.
Look, I'd be impressed if you knew. So shade is the side of an element that doesn't receive the light. Shadow is what's cast onto an element that's blocking the light. So, just to show you, so for instance, the edge of this column is round, and so part of the column is away from the sun, right? So that darker side of the column, that's shade. But over here, where this part of the building is casting a shadow onto the column and entablature behind it, that would be a shadow. Typically you render shadow darker, shade a little bit lighter. Yeah, essentially.
Wait, what? Could you repeat that?
quick
Any
little
other
sketch.
questions to wrap up for today?
Yeah, any final questions?
You said you work at BU, yeah?
I do, yeah.
Does their architecture program work with the art program that you do here, or are they two separate programs?
So we need to do more, but we've had like our teachers come and do demonstrations in watercolor that have been super helpful. Our students love those. I don't know that our architecture professors ever do the opposite and go and teach art students. This is kind of that, which is actually kind of rare.
We are getting a lot of, so the architecture program that we are working, it's not official, but it's nearly official, starting here, will translate to other programs. So you'll be able to transfer to UVU. And since we're in the visual arts department, which is now going to be called the Department of Art and Architecture, as I mentioned, there will be a lot of crossover between the two.
Okay, so here's a little drawing showing a cube. Side that the light source is not touching, that's the shade. The shadow on the ground from the cube is the shadow. I'll leave my final comment as this. I'll finish this and post it on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. Benjamin F. Felix is my @ Benjamin F. Felix. So you can see the final of this rendering, since you guys didn't get to see it finished. So is that good?
That's great,
Okay.
thank you.